Captain Kim stood on the observation deck of the transport ship New Hope, watching the morning sun rise over New Eden Colony. Below him, the farming settlement stretched across the green valley like a peaceful painting. Children ran through the streets on their way to school. Farmers drove their hover trucks toward the wheat fields that fed the entire colony. Everything looked perfect and safe. "Another beautiful day," said Communications Officer Lee, joining Kim at the window. She held a steaming cup of coffee and smiled as she watched the colonists start their daily routines. Kim nodded. "Hard to believe we've been here for 15 years already. Sometimes I miss Earth, but this place feels like home now." New Eden was humanity's pride. 50,000 people had left their old lives behind to build something new among the stars. They had no military base, no weapons factories, no soldier training grounds. Just farms, schools, hospitals, and homes where families could live in peace. The colony's defense system was basic. A few old patrol ships and some protective shields around the main settlement. It was enough to stop pirates or small raiders, but nothing more. The colonists never expected to need anything stronger. Park Min-ho was teaching his morning math class when the first explosions shook the school building. The 10-year-old students looked up from their books with confused faces. "What was that, Teacher Park?" asked little Sujin, her eyes wide with worry. Before Park could answer, the emergency sirens began to wail across the colony. Through the classroom windows they could see dark shapes moving across the sky. Massive alien ships, bigger than any vessel the colonists had ever seen, descended through the clouds like metal monsters. "Everyone under your desks, quickly!" Park shouted, but it was already too late. The Corvin attack was swift and merciless. Their warships opened fire on the colony without any warning or demands for surrender. Energy beams cut through buildings like knives through paper. The hospital, where Dr. Yoon was delivering a baby, disappeared in a ball of fire. The primary school where Park taught exploded in seconds, taking the teacher and 30 children with it. Captain Kim ran toward the colony's command center as explosions rocked the settlement around him. The peaceful streets had become a war zone. People screamed and ran in every direction, but there was nowhere to hide from the alien weapons. "Lee, get to the transport ship." Kim yelled into his communicator. "Prepare for emergency evacuation." "Sir, the defense shields are down," came the panicked reply. "Our patrol ships are gone. They destroyed everything in the first wave." Kim reached the command center just as Commander O was sending out distress signals to the Galactic Council. The older man's hands shook as he worked the controls. "Any response?" Kim asked. O shook his head. "The nearest council station is 6 days away. Even if they send help immediately, it won't matter." Through the command center's windows, they watched the Corvin ships methodically destroy every building in the colony. These weren't random attacks. The aliens targeted specific locations: the power plant, the water treatment facility, the communication arrays. They knew exactly how to cripple human infrastructure. "Why are they doing this?" O whispered. "We never threatened anyone. We're just farmers and teachers." Kim had no answer. The Corvin Empire was known for taking territory, but they usually offered surrender terms first. This was different. This was extermination. Nurse Young ran through the burning streets, carrying 2 wounded children in her arms. She had been working the night shift at the medical clinic when the attack began. Now the clinic was a pile of smoking rubble and she was one of the few survivors. "Help! Someone help us!" she cried, but most of the other colonists were dead or dying. The lucky ones had been killed quickly in the initial bombardment. Others were trapped in burning buildings with no way out. Young reached the transport ship just as Captain Kim and the surviving colonists were boarding. Less than 200 people had made it out of 50,000. Families were torn apart, children orphaned, entire bloodlines ended in a single morning. "Is this everyone?" Kim asked as Lee sealed the ship's doors. Young nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I couldn't save more. There wasn't time." The transport ship lifted off just as the Corvin completed their destruction of New Eden. From space, the colony looked like a burning scar on the planet's surface. Nothing moved down there anymore. The peaceful farms, the laughing children, the busy markets, all gone. Captain Kim sat in the pilot's chair and set course for the nearest Galactic Council station. His hands were steady, but his eyes burned with anger he had never felt before. "Record everything," he told Lee. "Every detail of what happened here. The galaxy needs to know what the Corvin did to innocent people." Lee activated the ship's recording systems and began documenting the massacre. She captured images of the destroyed colony, recorded testimonies from the survivors, and created a complete record of the unprovoked attack. As the New Hope jumped to hyperspace, none of the survivors knew they were carrying more than just evidence of a war crime. They were carrying news that would wake up something the galaxy had forgotten, something that had been sleeping peacefully for 200 years. The Corvan commanders celebrated their easy victory and planned their next attack on human space. They had no idea they had just made the worst mistake in galactic history. The Galactic Council Station Harmony floated in the void between star systems like a massive metal flower. Its rotating sections housed diplomats and representatives from 47 different species, all working together to keep peace in their corner of the galaxy. Ambassador Jean of the peaceful Altarian species was reviewing trade agreements in his office when the emergency alert sounded. He looked up from his papers as his assistant, a young Altarian named Rio, burst through the door. "Ambassador, there's a human transport requesting immediate emergency docking," Rio said, his blue skin pale with worry. "They claim to be survivors of a colony attack." Jean frowned. Colony attacks were rare these days. Most species followed the Galactic Accords about civilian protection. "Which colony? And who attacked them?" "New Eden, sir. They say it was the Corvan Empire." The coffee cup in Jin's hand slipped and crashed to the floor. The Corvan were aggressive, yes, but they usually demanded surrender first. They didn't massacre entire colonies without reason. "Bring them to Council Chamber 7 immediately," Jean ordered. "And send word to all available council members. This needs immediate attention." An hour later, Captain Kim stood before a gathering of alien diplomats in the circular council chamber. His clothes were still dirty from the evacuation, and his eyes were red from grief and exhaustion. Behind him, the few surviving colonists sat quietly, some still holding wounded children. Kim activated the holographic display and showed the recording Lee had made. The chamber fell silent as images of the destroyed colony played in the air above them. Burning buildings, dead families, children's toys scattered in the ruins. "This was New Eden yesterday morning," Kim said, his voice steady despite his pain. 50,000 human civilians lived there. Farmers, teachers, doctors, families. Now less than 200 are alive. Council Elder Sue, an ancient reptilian being from the Drachmer species, leaned forward. "You claim this was unprovoked?" The Corvan gave no warning, no demands for surrender. "Nothing," Kim replied. "Their ships appeared without any communication. They began firing immediately. They targeted our schools and hospitals first." The hologram showed the systematic destruction of New Eden. The alien diplomats watched in growing horror as the Corvan ships methodically eliminated every building, every sign of human life. Ambassador Kong of the insectoid Zephyri species stood up, his antenna trembling with anger. "This violates every principle of the Galactic Accords. Civilian populations are protected under Council law." "The Corvan have broken the law before," said Representative Park from the aquatic Nereid worlds. "But never this completely. Never with such thoroughness." In the back of the chamber, Council Archivist 1 sat at his data terminal, his fingers flying across the keys. The elderly human had worked for the Council for 60 years, maintaining their vast historical databases. Something about this attack bothered him deeply. "Ambassador Jean," 1 called out, his voice cutting through the discussions. "I need to speak with you immediately. In private." Jean looked confused but followed the old archivist to a quiet corner of the chamber. The other council members continued watching the horrific recordings from New Eden. "What is it, 1? Jean asked. 1's face was white with fear. "Do you know anything about human military history?" "Some. They've been peaceful members of the galactic community for 2 centuries. They have small defense fleets, nothing more." 1 shook his head vigorously. "That's what they want everyone to think. I've been researching their old records." He pulled up files on his portable screen. "Look at this." Jean read the ancient documents, his confusion growing. "The Great Plague War? The Iron Wolves of Terra? What does this have to do with New Eden?" "Everything," 1 whispered. "The humans ended that war, Jean. A 1,000-year conflict that was tearing apart this entire sector. The Corvan's ancestors were involved in that war too. I don't understand. How did humans end it? They're farmers and merchants." 1's hands shook as he scrolled through more files. "They didn't end it through diplomacy. They ended it through complete military victory. In less than 10 years they defeated every faction involved. Their tactics were so effective, so ruthless, that the surviving species begged for peace." Jean stared at the records. "But that was centuries ago. Modern humans are peaceful." "That's just it," 1 said, his voice barely audible. "They chose to be peaceful. After the war, humanity deliberately reduced their visible military presence. They've been hiding their true capabilities for 200 years. The terrible implications began to sink in. Jean looked back at Captain Kim, who was still showing the destruction of New Eden to the horrified council members. You're saying the Corvin just attacked the descendants of the species that once conquered this entire sector? One nodded. And killed their civilians. Their children. He pulled up one more file. Look at this old Corvin military doctrine from after the Great Plague War. Jean read the faded text. Under no circumstances should Corvin forces engage human military units. If contact with human vessels is unavoidable, immediate retreat is authorized. The Iron Wolves show no mercy to those who threaten their pack. Dear gods, Jean breathed. The Corvin have forgotten their own history. In the main chamber, Elder Sue was addressing Captain Kim. The Council will send a formal protest to the Corvin Empire immediately. This massacre will not go unpunished. Kim looked at the alien diplomat with cold eyes. With respect, Elder, I don't think the Corvin will care about your protests. They made their position clear when they murdered our children. One hurried back to his terminal and sent an urgent message to the Council archives on the capital world. If his research was correct, the galaxy was about to see something it hadn't witnessed in 2 centuries. The sleeping giant was about to wake up. And when it did, the Corvin Empire would finally remember why their ancestors had written those warnings about humans. They would learn why the old military texts spoke of the Iron Wolves with such fear. But by then it would be far too late. The emergency meeting room deep beneath Seoul was a place most humans never knew existed. Built into solid rock 3 kilometers underground, it had been designed to survive anything the galaxy could throw at Earth. Today it would host the most important military discussion in 2 centuries. Fleet Admiral Lee entered the room with quick, purposeful steps. Her gray uniform bore no decorations, but every person in the room knew she commanded humanity's true military power. Behind her walked Defense Minister Kim, his face grim as he carried the classified reports from New Eden. Around the circular table sat the 12 members of the Human Defense Council. These were not politicians or diplomats. They were the guardians of humanity's greatest secret, the real size and strength of the human fleet. Show them, Admiral Lee said simply. Minister Kim activated the holographic display. The images from New Eden filled the air above the table. Burning schools. Dead children. Families torn apart by Corvin weapons. The council members watched in complete silence. 50,000 civilians, Admiral Lee said when the recording ended. Farmers, teachers, doctors, children. All dead because the Corvin thought we were weak. General Park, the oldest member of the council, slowly stood up. His weathered hands rested on the table as he spoke. How long has it been since we last showed our true strength? 203 years, replied Admiral Lee. Since the end of the Great Plague War. And in that time, we've let the galaxy believe we're just peaceful merchants and farmers, said Admiral Cho, her voice cold with anger. We've hidden our fleets in the outer systems. We've pretended to be weak so others would feel safe. Minister Kim pulled up another display. This one showed the public records of human military forces, the small defense fleets that patrolled known trade routes, the minimal border guards, the peaceful exploration vessels. To any outside observer, humanity appeared to have perhaps 50 military ships total. This is what the galaxy sees, Kim said. This is what the Corvin saw before they attacked New Eden. Admiral Lee pressed a button on her control panel. The display changed, showing a very different picture. Massive shipyards hidden in asteroid fields. Fleet bases built inside hollow moons. Weapons factories that had been disguised as mining operations for centuries. This is reality, Admiral Lee said. The numbers were staggering. Over 800 military vessels of various classes. Advanced technology that surpassed most galactic civilizations. Weapons systems based on lessons learned during the Great Plague War, when humanity had fought for its very survival. The Corvin think they attacked weak prey, said General Yoon. They have no idea they just declared war on the species that conquered half the galaxy once before. Admiral Lee activated her personal communicator. Computer, begin Operation Iron Wolf. Authorization Alpha 77. Throughout the solar system, hidden installations came to life. On the dark side of Luna, massive doors opened in what appeared to be empty craters. Inside, sleek warships that had been waiting in darkness for generations powered up their engines. In the asteroid belt, mining stations transformed into weapons platforms. Their civilian disguises fell away, revealing the true purpose they had served all along, to guard the approaches to Earth while appearing harmless. Captain Seo stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Terra's Vengeance, watching her crew work at their stations. For 20 years, they had maintained this massive warship in secret, telling their families they worked at a deep space research facility. Today that lie would finally end. All sections report ready for combat operations, said Commander Nam from the tactical station. Weapons systems fully charged. Engine power at maximum. Signal from Fleet Command, reported Communications Officer Han. All ships are to proceed to Rally Point 7 for fleet assembly. Captain Seo nodded. Rally Point 7 was an empty space beyond Pluto, far from any civilian shipping lanes. It had been chosen long ago as the gathering point for humanity's hidden fleet. On Mars, Colonel Jean walked through the underground facility where humanity's most advanced weapons were manufactured. Workers who had spent their entire careers building agricultural equipment and mining tools now revealed what they had really been making. How long to convert to full wartime production? Colonel Jean asked his chief engineer. 6 hours, came the reply. We've been ready for this day for decades. Every civilian factory in the system has secondary military production capabilities. The engineer paused, looking at the news feeds showing the destruction of New Eden. Those bastards picked the wrong species to test. Admiral Lee stood before the main tactical display in the command center. Red dots showed the positions of over 100 human warships moving toward their assembly points. These were not the small patrol boats the galaxy knew about. These were ships of war, built by the descendants of the species that had once brought peace to the galaxy through superior firepower. Admiral, said her aide, we're receiving communications from other human colonies. They're asking if this means the isolation protocol is over. Lee considered the question. For 2 centuries, humanity had deliberately kept a low profile. They had hidden their true strength to avoid frightening other species. They had chosen to appear weak rather than repeat the mistakes that had led to the Great Plague War. Yes, she said finally. The isolation protocol is terminated. Send word to all human territories. The galaxy will now see us as we truly are. On the bridge of his flagship, Corvin Admiral Doak celebrated his victory at New Eden. His staff officers raised toasts to their easy conquest of human space. They planned their next attacks on other human colonies, expecting the same weak resistance. None of them noticed the sensor readings that would have terrified them. In the darkness beyond their detection range, humanity's true fleet was moving. The Iron Wolves of Terra were hunting again. And this time they would show no mercy to those who had killed their children. Admiral Doak stood on the bridge of his flagship Corvin Glory, reviewing plans for the next human colony to attack. The destruction of New Eden had been so easy that his commanders were already arguing about which target would bring them the most glory. Sir, we're detecting some unusual sensor readings, reported his navigation officer, a young Corvin named Cole. Multiple hyperspace signatures approaching our position. Doak barely looked up from his tactical plans. Probably human merchant ships running away. Let them go. We have bigger prey to hunt. The hyperspace distortions grew stronger. On the bridge's main screen, swirling lights began to form as ships prepared to exit hyperspace near the Corvin fleet. Sir, these readings are much larger than merchant vessels, Cole said, his voice rising with concern. And there are a lot of them. Admiral Doak finally looked at his sensors, expecting to see a handful of human patrol boats coming to investigate New Eden's destruction. What he saw instead made his blood turn cold. Over 200 human warships materialized from hyperspace in perfect formation. They were not the small, lightly armed vessels the Corvin had expected. These were massive dreadnoughts and battle cruisers, their hulls gleaming with weapon arrays that dwarfed anything in the Corvin fleet. That's impossible, Doak whispered. Intelligence said the humans had maybe 30 ships total. On the bridge of the human flagship Earth's Wrath, Admiral Lee watched the Corvin fleet through the tactical display. The enemy had 73 vessels positioned around New Eden's orbit, still celebrating their massacre of innocent civilians. All ships, this is Admiral Lee, she broadcast to the human fleet. You know what happened here. You know what these monsters did to our people. Today we remind the galaxy why our ancestors were called the Iron Wolves. Captain Seo, commanding the dreadnought Terra's Vengeance, studied her targeting computer. The Corvin ships were arranged in a traditional defensive formation, perfect for fighting other conventional fleets. Unfortunately for them, humans didn't fight conventionally. Begin pattern Omega 7, Admiral Lee ordered. The human fleet split into multiple groups with movements so coordinated they seemed to flow like water. Where traditional space battles involved 2 fleets charging at each other, the humans used tactics that had been refined over centuries of warfare on Earth. Admiral Doak watched in growing panic as the human ships moved in ways that made no sense. Some groups appeared to retreat, drawing Corvin ships out of formation. Others flanked wide to the left and right, threatening to surround the entire Corvin fleet. A third group dove below the battle plane, approaching from an unexpected angle. All ships, attack formation. Doak ordered. Destroy the human fleet. The Corvin opened fire first, their energy weapons lighting up space with deadly beams. But the human ships were no longer where the Corvin had aimed. They moved with impossible precision, each vessel perfectly coordinated with every other ship in the fleet. Commander Nam watched his tactical screen from the bridge of Terra's Vengeance. Enemy weapons are hitting nothing but empty space. Their targeting computers can't keep up with our movement patterns. The first human counterattack came from 3 directions at once. The groups that had seemed to retreat suddenly reversed course, hitting the Corvin front line with devastating firepower. The flanking forces struck the enemy's sides, while the ships approaching from below targeted the Corvin command vessels. Doak's flagship shuddered as human weapons tore through its shields. Around him, half his fleet was already crippled or destroyed. The humans weren't just winning, they were demonstrating a level of tactical superiority that was almost insulting. How are they doing this? Doak demanded. No species fights like this. His tactical officer checked the battle computers, his hands shaking with fear. Sir, their coordination is perfect. Every ship moves as if controlled by a single mind. And their weapons? They're more advanced than anything in our database. Captain Han, commanding the battle cruiser New Dawn, targeted a Corvin heavy destroyer with her ship's main guns. The human weapons had been designed using lessons learned from the Great Plague War, when humanity had faced enemies with superior numbers and had been forced to develop superior technology. Direct hit, reported her weapons officer. Enemy ship is breaking apart. Target the next one, Han ordered. No survivors. They showed no mercy to our children. The battle lasted only 4 hours. When it ended, the Corvin's invincible 7th Fleet was scattered debris floating in the void. Of the 73 enemy ships that had participated in the massacre at New Eden, not one survived. Admiral Lee stood in her command center, watching the final Corvin vessel explode on her tactical display. Around her, the human fleet maintained perfect formation, ready for whatever came next. Signal all human territories, she ordered. Broadcast this battle record to every news network in the galaxy. Let them see what happens to those who attack our people. Communications Officer Park activated the galaxy-wide broadcast system. Within hours, the footage of the human victory would reach every civilized world. The peaceful farmers and merchants that everyone thought they knew had revealed themselves to be the descendants of the galaxy's most feared warriors. On the bridge of his crippled command ship, the only surviving Corvin from the battle, Admiral Doak sent a desperate message to his home world: do not engage human forces. Repeat, do not engage. They are not what we thought. They are not what anyone thought. But it was too late. The war had begun and the sleeping giant was fully awake. Admiral Lee's voice echoed across all Corvin frequencies. You attacked our civilians. You murdered our children. This was your first mistake. Your second mistake was believing it would go unanswered. The storm had been unleashed and the galaxy would never be the same. The war lasted exactly 37 days. On the 38th day, the Corvin Empire surrendered unconditionally as human dreadnoughts surrounded their capital world of Corvin Prime. Emperor Jack sat in his throne room, staring at the screens that showed the human fleet positioned around his planet. Each ship was larger than his most powerful battleship. There were so many of them that they blocked out the stars. Your Majesty, said his chief advisor, crawling forward on his knees. The human admiral is waiting for your response to the surrender terms. Jack had ruled the Corvin Empire for 40 years. In that time he had conquered 12 star systems and enslaved 6 different species. He had never imagined that his empire could be brought to its knees by the peaceful farmers from New Eden. Bring me the surrender documents, he said, his voice hollow with defeat. On the bridge of the flagship Earth's Wrath, Admiral Lee watched the Corvin capital through her view screen. The massive city world was home to 8 billion Corvin, all now under the shadow of human weapons. Admiral, the Emperor is ready to sign, reported Communications Officer Park. All Corvin military forces throughout the Empire have laid down their weapons. Lee nodded. The surrender terms were simple but complete. The Corvin would pay reparations to the families of New Eden's victims. They would reduce their military to 1/10 its current size. Most importantly, they would broadcast a formal apology across the entire galaxy, admitting their crime and accepting responsibility. And the other demands? Lee asked. All accepted, Park replied. Full access to Corvan military records, supervised elections in their conquered territories, and permanent human observers in their government. The war had been unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The humans had not simply defeated the Corvan, they had systematically dismantled their entire empire. Every Corvan military base had been captured or destroyed. Every Corvan fleet had been scattered. The species that had dominated their sector for 3 centuries had been reduced to begging for mercy. At the Galactic Council Station Harmony, Ambassador Jean watched the live broadcast of the surrender ceremony. Around him in the observation lounge, diplomats from dozens of species sat in stunned silence. On the screen, Emperor Jack signed the surrender documents while Admiral Lee stood nearby. The human admiral's expression was cold and professional, showing no satisfaction at the Corvan's defeat. "I still can't believe it," whispered Ambassador Yoon of the peaceful cetacean worlds. 37 days to destroy an entire empire. Council Elder Su, the ancient reptilian diplomat, shook his head slowly. "We forgot. All of us forgot what humans were capable of when their families are threatened." Jean remembered the old records that Archivist 1 had shown him weeks ago. The Great Plague War. The Iron Wolves of Terra. The species that had once conquered half the known galaxy, then chosen to hide their strength for 2 centuries. They were protecting us, Jean realized aloud. All this time they were protecting us from themselves. On Earth, crowds gathered in the streets to watch the surrender ceremony. For most humans, this was their first glimpse of their species' true military power. The hidden fleets, the secret weapons, the massive industrial capacity that had been disguised as civilian infrastructure, it was all revealed now. Young Park Min stood with his parents in Seoul Central Square, watching the giant screens that showed human dreadnoughts surrounding Corvan Prime. His older sister had been a teacher at New Eden. She had died in the first minutes of the Corvan attack. "Is it over?" he asked his father. "Will they pay for what they did to Sue?" His father put a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Yes, son. It's over. And the galaxy will never forget what happens to those who harm innocent people." In her private quarters aboard Earth's Wrath, Admiral Lee composed her final report to the Human Defense Council. The war was won, but winning had cost humanity something precious, their anonymity. For 200 years, they had been able to live peacefully because other species saw them as harmless. That was no longer possible. "Admiral," came a voice from her communicator. "Priority message from Earth." Lee activated the screen to see Defense Minister Kim in the underground command center. "The Council has made their decision," Kim said. "The isolation protocol will not be reinstated. Humanity will take its place as a major galactic power." Lee had expected this. You could not demonstrate such overwhelming military superiority and then pretend to be weak again. The galaxy had seen the Iron Wolves and there was no putting them back to sleep. "What about the other species?" Lee asked. "How are they reacting?" "Fear mostly," Kim admitted. "But also respect. 3 empires have already requested defensive alliances. The Galactic Council wants to expand and give humanity a permanent seat." Across the galaxy, the news of humanity's victory spread like wildfire. In markets and meeting halls, on distant colonies and crowded space stations, every species was asking the same questions. How had they missed humanity's true strength? How had a species capable of such devastating warfare managed to hide among them for centuries? The answer was simple and terrifying. Humans had chosen to be peaceful. They had possessed the power to conquer the galaxy for 200 years, but had decided instead to tend gardens and teach children and heal the sick. Until someone killed their children. Emperor Jack finished signing the surrender documents and looked up at Admiral Lee. "I have to ask," he said quietly. "Why did you stop? You could have destroyed our worlds, enslaved our people. Why show mercy?" Admiral Lee's expression softened slightly. "Because we are not you, Emperor. We don't wage war for conquest or glory. We fight only to protect those who cannot protect themselves." She gestured toward the view screen showing Corvan Prime. "Your people will live, they will rebuild, and they will remember this lesson. That is enough." As the surrender ceremony ended, the galaxy began to adjust to its new reality. Humanity had revealed itself as the dominant military power, but they had also shown restraint in victory. They were wolves, yes, but wolves that chose when to bare their teeth. The New Eden massacre would be remembered as the day the galaxy learned an important truth. Humans might appear to be peaceful farmers and merchants, but they were the children of a warrior world. And they never forgot those who harmed the innocent.